Hello and welcome to the launch of The Generosity, a new collection of poems by Lucy Shaw, published by Paraclete Press. Lucy is a prolific writer with dozens of publications to her name, including children's books and non-fiction prose, as well as collaborations with other writers. She's also the artist in residence at Regent College, the writer in residence, sorry, at Regent College. And by my reckoning, this is Lucy's 17th solo collection, and now in the 10th decade of her life, there's no sign of her output slowing down. There are 93 new poems in this book. I don't know if 93 is significant in any way, Lucy. Maybe we can talk about that. But we're going to hear some of them today. We're going to hear Lucy read. We're also going to talk about them. If you've got any questions that you'd like to put to Lucy, you can do that. And the email address is questions@regent-college.edu. In the introduction to The Generosity, Lucy says, "I write out of enthusiasm rather than discipline. A snowstorm, a bad cold, visitors, grocery shopping, needing a nap, driving in the country, cooking dinner, making our bed, or feeling the guilt of leaving it unmade. Immediacy is my mistress," she writes. "So what I am doing at my age makes me seem like a rebellious teen let loose on the world. It's a bit of a stimulant in that I feel a high when the words are charging into my mind, demanding entrance." Well, Lucy, many congratulations on the publication of The Generosity, and we're very thankful that these words keep barging into your life. I know you are going to read some of them to us today, but before we hear the first one, can you tell us a bit about what prompted this new collection of poems?
I think the whole idea of the generosity of God, the largeness of creation, particularly where I live with my husband, John, in Bellingham, Washington. We have the mountains, we have forests and islands and oceans, and we have a sailboat, but everything is very green up here in the state of Washington. And that is part of the generosity that I'm so grateful for, from the hand of God, and also the generosity of friendships. We have a wonderful community of people of faith and friends. So that it all comes from the gracious hand of our God. So that's part of where the idea of the generosity came. And also the idea of giving back what we have received. I think that's part of what I'm called to do as a poet.
That's great. We're going to explore some of these big themes in the collection as we go along. But would you like to read the first one to us?
I want to read a poem about our pandemic, the terrible thing that has affected all of our lives and our civilizations in such a profound way. So it's a question: how shall we sing the Lord's songs in a strange land? The old rhythms, the melodies of praise strangle in our throats, and the words fall to the ground like leaves in autumn. The air thickens with suspicion and doubt, and who's to say anymore what is true enough to last, to prevail? Isolation feels like a punishment for offenses we never performed. Let us trust now the ground under our feet, that which has proven steady for generations. Look up, the heavens are still there, unclouded, beatific. We breathe even though masks clothe our faces. Prayer surrounds us, close as our skin, weaving for us garments of trust and solace. Even in our isolation, we are joined in love, never alone.
That's great, thank you. And there are a number of poems that touch on this. So they're very recent poems, yes? I mean,
Yes, they're all pretty recent poems within the last 18 months or so.
Yeah. And so as far as the virus is concerned, one of your poems is called The Virus, isn't it? But what impact has it had on you and your life and your creativity?
Well, it's freed us from a lot of other responsibilities in a way. we found these last few months times of creativity, of peacefulness. We have all we need. God is good. Our families are well. Two of my children and their families live here in Bellingham. So we're very grateful for their presence in our lives. But we're healthy. We're grateful. We're doing all the right things to stay healthy. So that's the way it is, right?
Have you found that it's kind of affected your writing? I mean, the kind of you talk in this poem about isolation feels like a punishment. I think a lot of people feel like that. That somehow or other there's this thing hanging over us that stops life, stops any kind of creativity.
And I think the difficulty is we don't know how long it's going to go on, how it's going to end, what will happen afterwards if this thing gets, if we get the vaccines and so on. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I think we have to just dig down into the ground of our being, which is the life in God, that we're here for a purpose and we want to fulfill that purpose and stay close to stay close to the responsibilities we've been given as children of God and as people on this earth. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but
well, I mean,
we tend to run on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a response to the virus. Maybe some people will be quite surprised by, because you're so positive. You're so desirous to kind of see good in this, despite the fact that it feels like a condemnation.
It does, yes, exactly.
So would you like to go on and read some more? How about another couple of poems?
Sure. I'd like to read one called The Plane Trees. When John and I were in France years ago, we noticed on the River Seine how all the banks have these beautiful plane trees along, for miles and miles, these plane trees, which I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they have these markings on their bark, and the beauty of their reflection in the river itself really left a big mental impression, physical impression almost in my mind. So this poem is called The Plane Trees by the River Seine. So you decide this is worth writing about or painting. The shapes of the branches on the trees, how the afternoon sun gleams on the variegated trunks, how their reflections echo in the river. You cannot change the image that has been there for centuries. All you can do is move your own body, shifting the angle here and there, back and forth, so that you see the thing differently until you find a satisfaction. Is this how we solve the enigmas of living? Things are what they are, and God is who God is, unchangeable. To satisfy our souls, it is we who must move or be moved within the contours of grace until a fresh composition in space, where light will beautify our faces enough to arrange us in a fresh, particular space in creation. So the whole idea is that we have to find that angle of entry into the life of God. And it takes some some perception that may take a while for us to find that angle of connection.
Another one? Should we?
Another one?
Yeah, should we go for another one?
Okay, let's see. Oh, I wanted to read this about my husband's painting. There's a painting of his right on the wall behind me, and it's called White Space. This page, and any page in any book I read, is a pale sky in which, centered, the text kindles in my eye, leaping into focus, telling me this is where the author's plot develops, next and next and next. My husband's paintings, framed in snowy oblong mats, draw our eyes focused to what once caught his artist's eye and urged the squirrel hair brush loaded with pigment to limn a landscape. Also, my notebook, its small blank pages pure as a guilt-free conscience, waits ready as a fallow field for plowing with dark lines of verse that stutter, scattering like furrows on farmland.
Yeah, great
So
stuff.
Yeah.
Those images of the artistic creation of the plane trees. I mean, you start along the River Seine, yes, and you know it may be that the artist is looking at the same vista that thousands of other artists have looked at, and yet we're looking to find some new take on it, some new angle on it.
Something unique, yeah, something fresh.
And do you think that's a kind of image of the work of the artist always, that we're actually going over things that have been done time and time again? Many others have done it before us, and yet it's always going to be our statement, our take on this experience.
Yes, exactly. It's unique. Because each of us is unique, and we're given a unique way of expressing ourselves. Each of us with our own individual voices, our minds, our spirits, like no one else. And to use that gift to connect with other souls and other spirits is that's the task of the poet and the artist, to reach out and to say something or show something that's different, that's unique and beautiful and precious.
I mean, it's interesting that you kind of contrast that restlessness of the artist trying to find a new place to kind of paint, to set the easel, or to place to kind of get a new perspective. You contrast that with the unchangeability of God.
Yes.
And I mean, that's a really interesting thought. Obviously, the unchangeability of God is something that is very much part of the biblical witness. But there's also an interesting emphasis on God moving, isn't there? In the movement of God. And I just wonder how you kind of see the relationship between those things, the kind of the solidity of God, as it were. The unchangeability, but then also this unexpectedness of God. Yes.
Well, I mean, God is everything. God is everywhere. I mean, we cannot escape from him. I'd like to read a poem called The O in Hope, because this is one of my favorite poems that I've ever written, because of the letter O appears in so many wonderful words that join themselves together in this poem, I hope. The O in hope. Hope has this lovely vowel at its throat. Think how we cry, oh, as the sun's circle clears the ridge above us on the hill. O is the shape of a mouth singing, and of a cherry as it lends its sweetness to the tongue. Oh, say the open eyes of unexpected beauty, and then, wow. O is endless as a wedding ring, a round pool, the shape of it drops widening on the water's surface. O is the center of love, and O was in the invention of the wheel. It multiplies in the zoo, doubles in a door that opens, grows in the heart of a green wood, in the moon, and in the endless looping circuit of the planets. Mood carries it, and books, and holy fools, cotton, a useful tool, and knitting wool. I love the doubled O in good and cosmos, and how O revolves, solves, is in itself complete, unbroken, a circle enclosing us, holding us all together, everything both in center and circumference, zeroing in on the omega that finds its ultimate center in the name of God.
Mm. Mm. That's great stuff.
Do you want me to read a totally different poem?
Why not?
Okay, this is called Dandelion. And I'm sure this is true in England too. The dandelions, the prolific weed that heralds spring for most of us. It's one of the first things that shows up in the spring. Dandelion. As the days warm and lengthen, the grass is getting happy almost overnight. Under my window, the first star of spring opens its eye on the front lawn. Yellow as butter, it is only one, but it is one. And in the nature of things, and like the multiple asterisks seeding the night sky, it will flourish and take over every grassy bank in town. I long to be prolific as the dandelion, spinning pale parachutes of words, claiming a new territory by the power of fluff. The stars in their courses have bloomed an unending glory across the heavens, but here in my backyard, a local constellation prepares to launch multiple short-lived radiant coronas to proclaim the new sprung season.
Mm. Great. What just strikes a reader in, if somebody coming to your poetry is the sense of wonder that you've got. Obviously, there's a lot of wonder, the stuff of nature, and the remarkable things that are all around us and that we don't remark on very often, but also just the ordinary stuff of life. You've got a quote right at the beginning of the book. This is the epigraph from Dorothy Sayers.
Yeah.
Heaven deliver us. What's a poet? Something that can't go to bed without making a song about it.
It's true. I mean, it's an impulse that will not be denied. You have to do it.
This keeps being renewed, this.
Yes.
Keep having to do
it. Does. Yes. And there's a particular joy when you sense the words coming and you recognize them as authentic and you get them into your computer and you play with them and you move them around and, eventually something comes of it, something that you feel is worthy enough to, represent you.
Yeah, the impression that you get from, you know, your introduction and some lines of the poems is that these things come to you, and it's just a kind of, it's a compulsion to express them, to let it out, as it were.
Yeah.
And yet, you know, you must craft. You know, you know that.
Yeah.
You know, poetry is a craft as well, isn't it? What's the relationship between the immediacy of the poem and then the kind of crafting element of it?
Well, I love the word attention, paying attention. It comes from a Latin word, tendere, which means to lean into something. And so paying attention is my task in life, paying attention to what is around me, what meaning it may have, how it can provoke in me new responses. So I love that word, attention, the Latin word attendere. I was grateful in high school I had 4 years of Latin.
Great stuff.
Then,
yeah. Very important. Latin.
And then New Testament Greek. When I went to college, I took a major in New Testament Greek. So language, you know, is such a wonderful tool. It's such a wonderful way of, we've been given. Every nation has its own language. It's an impulse that will not be denied.
Can I ask you about Dorothy Sayers? Actually, I mean, you start the book with this epigraph, but you've also got a quote from her in the introduction, and you say that you quote her saying, "Well, no, occasionally I feel like Dorothy Sayers, who commented after completing a sonnet, I feel like God on the seventh day."
Yes. Yeah. Well, I've always enjoyed Dorothy Sayers. Peter Wimsey stories, you know, they're the most wonderful. When I go on a vacation, I've read them all many times, but I still love them. The Nine Tailors, Gaudy Night, those Peter Wimsey stories. But also, she wrote a wonderful book called The Mind of the Maker, which brings together theological understandings of who God is and why He makes, and why we are to be makers in that tradition, and in the power that God has given us to make. So, Sayers, what a character she was, and her relationship.
A great artist in her own right, a great writer, and as you say, a great thinker about the art. One of the kind of pushbacks against Sayers and her approach to thinking about Christianity and art is that it almost gets too kind of too godlike, too much this sense of, you know, we are creators like God is a creator. What's your view of that? Do you think she made a kind of an overemphasis on that?
I'm not sure that I would say that. So ask that question again. I'm not quite sure.
Just that you know, that quote that you had from the sonnet, I feel like God on the seventh day.
Yes.
You know, one of the things that, you know, some people have pushed back on Sayers about her approach to art and in The Mind of the Maker is that she makes too close a comparison between the artist as maker and God as maker. You know, do you agree with that, or do you feel that no?
I see the line of thought that she's. I see where that line of thought is going. I do believe we're created beings, and I love the word poema, which means the act of creating. And it is the task that God has given us. It go all the way back to Eden. And I have a poem about Eve.
Mm.
Would you like me to read that?
Yeah, that's great. You're in Eden. You've taken us to Eden. So let's hear about Eve.
Okay. I'm trying to find the poem.
You find it tricky to
locate. I've got it.
That's good.
It's called Eve. What was it like for her, recovering from recent surgery, to lie down on the red earth next to the stranger from whom she'd just been detached, with whom she was lately an integral body part, drawing in now her first breaths of Eden air, wild with the fragrance of fresh flowers. Looking down at her lovely nakedness, did she anticipate being a mother? Every one of us draining out of her pale body. I ask her, did you dream, even for a moment, that your blood could run rampant in my bones? And do I have your hair, your eyes, your hunger for fresh, forbidden fruit? So, Eve as the mother, Eve as the one who's exploring creation for the first time, and an individual from the creative hand of God. I love the fact that Eve was who she was, and she was curious enough to pluck the wrong fruit from the wrong tree. I don't like that, but I recognize that human impulse in her.
Yeah, and you recognize it in yourself as well. That's the
yes,
kind of
yes.
The poem, isn't it?
Yeah,
fascinating. So can I ask you, I mean, you've lived a long life. You've lived through incredible changes in the world. I mean, maybe some of the most significant changes in the West have been actually in attitudes to the state and to the role and the status of women in society.
Yes.
And I just wonder where you kind of locate yourself here. I mean, was feminism important to you? I mean, what was your kind of relationship with the women's movement and all of that?
Well, I've always been very supportive of the fact that women are given as many gifts as men have been given. And it is their role to be life givers. I mean, we're the ones that bear children in our bodies and give them forth, but we're also the ones who have the ability to create, perhaps with our emotions and our intelligence both. Women are such a vital part of the creation because, fortunately, men, worthy as they are and fruitful as they are, they cannot bring bodies out of their own body. So I have 5 children. I've got numerous grandchildren and now 4 great-grandchildren. And they all came from women's bodies, and they are all new creations from the hand of God, each one of them.
I mean, obviously, the theme of motherhood has been affirmed, and throughout history, we're seeing different kinds of affirmations of womanhood in our time, some of which maybe pushes back against the kind of just the reproductive aspect of it. And I mean, have you felt aligned with that as well?
Well, I've recognized the patriarchy and the fact that much of scripture was written, most of it written by men, and translated by men with a particular structure in mind, with men as the preeminent strengths. And when you think of all the translations of scripture and the new translations that are coming out, which are recognizing the fact that the patriarchy of the writers and the translators has made a huge change in the tone of God's voice into humanity. And it needs that other voice, that voice of love, of compassion, of fruitfulness, rather than just the old male dominance. Sorry to say that to you. I'm not calling you out for that.
Your words are music to my wife's ears. I can assure you that. And
well, I've been really grateful to have two wonderful husbands who have, they've authenticated me as a woman. So, yeah.
Yeah, tremendous. Well, should we have another poem? How about Midnight?
All right. Midnight. In bed, and a kind of loneliness settles. I'm wakeful, wondering. I reach out my hand from under the sheet and over the edge into the empty space beyond, and feel for God's hand, his large calloused palm, a shallow cave, fingers curling their intimate way around mine. Not a word spoken, but in the dark air, a glow like a night light near the door. I think in the night, if we have difficulty falling asleep, it helps us to recognize that God is in there with us in our sleeplessness, and we can maintain that contact, which is calming enough, and allows us to fall asleep.
There's so much hope in a lot of your poems. I mean, obviously we heard the O in hope.
Yes.
There's hope in this poem too, and a sense of presence as well. So presence is a title of another one of your poems, is a profound sense of the presence of life and love and of God himself in your writing. But one of the kind of great distinctive themes of the 20th century, really, of modern art actually, has been not of presence and of hope, but actually of absence, isn't it? That sense of abandonment. Where was God at Auschwitz? Where was God at Hiroshima, or 9/11, or the Rwandan genocide? All of these kind of things. I wonder if you've you've shared that sense of abandonment as well as of hope and of presence.
Abandonment. Well, we see it every day in human beings who disagree with each other, who cannot reach. They cannot reach a way of connecting that's meaningful. I think that was true, particularly in my upbringing. My parents were very British, and I was the oldest child, and they wanted a son because a son is the one who carries the name into the next generation, rather than the woman who's going to get married and change her name, probably. And I had a dad who really loved me and who valued my writing, and my mother never did. if I wrote a poem, I'd show it to her, and she said, "Very nice, dear, very nice." And that was it. But my father loved to carry my poems around in his briefcase as he traveled and preached and showed them to his friends. So having that kind of support and love from my father was an immense blessing in my life. I could read this poem,
Well,
Family of Origin.
Hold that for a moment, Lucy.
Okay.
Some questions. And yeah, it would be great to hear that poem about your family. But let's grab a couple of questions first. And one is from David Heritage, who asks, you mentioned how, I mean, he's loving what you're talking about and loving hearing you read the poems. But you mentioned how Latin has influenced your understanding of language, using it to lead us into exploring life through poetry. Are there people who, are there other people who have influenced your writing? So leaving the family aside for a moment, who are the who influenced your writing?
Well, Madeline L'Engle, she was the one who wrote A Wrinkle in Time, which was made into a movie recently. Not a very good movie, I don't think, but the book itself, A Wrinkle in Time, explored aspects of the universe and our place in the universe in a remarkable way. I was privileged to meet Madeline L'Engle at Wheaton College. We were both speakers at a writers' conference, and I began to publish some of her poetry after that. She had written a book called, I can't even remember the name of the book. We published 3 of her books of poems, and then I asked her to write a book on faith and art, and she wrote she handed me a manuscript about 6 months later, very untidy typescript manuscript. And she said, "Here, see if you can do something with this." And I was able to take it apart and sort of put little piles on my floor of different themes and different ideas, and then put the whole thing back together again in a new sequence. And she loved it, and her husband loved it. And from then on, we began to publish books together. I edited and published 11 of her books, and we did 3 books ourselves as friends. The best one is called Friends for the Journey, and it just elucidates our relationship as writers, but also she came from the far left liberally, theologically, and I came from the far right. And we met in the middle, and we were able to sing the doxology together when we worked. Sometimes at the end of an editing session, we would just stand up and sing, "Praise God from whom all blessings flow." And that was part of our relationship. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but that's where my mind went.
That's great. So Madeline L'Engle was obviously. Any other writers that we mentioned? Sayers, of course, but are there others who have left a kind of profound mark on you?
Yes, I'm part of a group of writers called the Chrysostom Society, and probably know the name Richard Foster. He and I decided that we needed time to get together as writers and Christians and support each other in our art. So we invited a number of other people, Philip Yancey, Eugene Peterson, and together, this is now 33 years ago, we started this. And having that kind of community, we would meet together for a long weekend once a year, share our work, support each other, and make contact with each other through the years. So it became an ongoing community, which is still there. unable to meet this year because of the pandemic, but we're in touch with each other. And having that family of writers, it's such a supportive thing. It's being part of God's body. We are like the fingers and the feet and the mouths and the hands of the body of God, doing our work.
Great, and that's great advice for young writers. And we've got a question about your advice to a young writer. Daniel Melville Jones has asked a question. What advice do you have for those who are just beginning to get their feet wet writing poetry? What habits have most helped you develop your craft?
I think to read good writing by other people, read good novels, allow the richness of the words to reach into you. My own practice has been to read a magazine, and sometimes a word will just jump off the page and demand to be the beginning of something. So reading good writing, also getting together with other people who want to do the same thing, form a little writers group where you can share your work and read together some of the great works of literature that enrich us all because they're written by people of wisdom and great gift. So we become, as new writers, we join the community of faith. We join the community of those who want to communicate the richness of their lives and the richness of human experience, which is never ending. So new writers, get together, share your work, go to writers' conferences, get some encouragement from book editors. There's been a wonderful conference every 2 years, in Michigan, state of Michigan, called the Calvin College Festival of Faith and Writing, and that's where like 2,500 writers from all over the country get together and do seminars and encourage each other and meet editors that may want to write their books, publish their books. So there's a huge community and of people with that same inner urge to write and to communicate something that they are seeing, and they want the reader to see it too. So
what would you say to folks who kind of fear that? Because, and you put a very positive tone on it, sharing and collaborating and showing your work to others. But I mean, it can be a pretty scary thing, can't it?
It can be a scary thing, but it's, if you find a forgiving sense, a forgiving friend or friends who are willing to listen and not be negative about your work, that will encourage. I get letters all the time from people who send me 3 or 4 poems and, want me to help them to make them better. And I'm happy to do that, though I have to admit, sometimes it gets a bit much. But find a mentor. Find someone who's writing you respect and who has the community, has the ability to encourage and to read your work, with a perceptive eye that sees the strengths and the weaknesses and helps the writer to correct their work or to enlarge it and make it more generous and more beautiful and more intelligent.
Great. Thank you. We were talking about your family, and you've got a poem about your family of origin. Let's hear that now, Lucy.
Okay. Family of origin. Our parents keep circulating in the rooms of our lives. Mine are long gone, but if it would satisfy them, I would take my heart out of its cage and gift wrap it for their anniversary. I glimpse them often. Dad reading a book over my shoulder, now and again offering words of advice that might have made sense 50 years ago. The words form clots in my memory, cells bright as blood, a private language unlike any other. My mother demanded mountains of me. I managed to supply foothills. They were lovely foothills, but failure would hang in the air. We still seem to meet in the heart of an old argument, words hanging unresolved, glittering sparks in the dark air. Sometimes when I feel most wrong about how to remember them, I am most right, seeing them as they settled in the grooves of my own memory. I am my own narrative arc, yet I arrange the candles and flowers on my mantelpiece the way my mother would have done it. And for my father, I still write small poems like the ones he carried in his briefcase to show his friends when I was very young.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I'm sure that resonated with me. I'm sure that will resonate with a lot of people. That kind of conversation that we carry on with our parents, and
yeah. And even though they're gone, they're still part of your life. They are still part of the core of who you are, for either for good or ill.
Yeah, the English writer John Mortimer, he wrote a play called A Voyage Around My Father, which is kind of was really about his own life. And I just wonder how he called it A Voyage Around My Father. And
yes.
It was an autobiographical piece about his life, that the sense that his life was, in a sense, kind of traversing around his father,
yes,
trying to understand him and negotiating with him and with our mother as well. So do you think that is, in a way, what kind of all our lives are? We are doing this thing of kind of trying to test ourselves against those who have formed us,
and that requires a good deal of introspection. Being honest with ourselves when we begin to see traits that are negative. I think one of the most difficult things I am dealing with in my own life is comparing myself with others and wanting to be the best and wanting that kind of recognition, and realizing that this is not a very healthy thing for my soul and spirit. I need to see myself as God sees me, with gifts, but also with lapses, with faulty understandings of scripture. I need to expose myself to the truth that God provides through other people, but also through the writings in the Bible. I love the Psalms because they are so honest about difficulty, pain, struggle, and I've been reading the Proverbs again, and they're so full of funny things. The Proverbs.
I know that you use that word introspection, and a lot of artists, particularly, have gone through psychotherapy.
Yes.
And the the whole relationship with our parents as kind of analyzed by Freud and Jung and all this sort of thing. But how helpful do you find introspection is actually? Can it be something that just is too much looking at yourself, when, you know, the calling of the poet is to actually maybe drawing on our own energies, but observing the world around us?
I think you have to find that balance. You definitely have to follow the trajectory of your own understanding, your own personal growth, your own growth as an artist. But you also have to balance that with the influences on the world around you. So it's a conversation. I love that word conversation, because it means a back and forth, converse, back and forth, an understanding of where other people are coming from, what they are thinking, what their lives find valuable, and then conversing and reaching a place of mutual understanding.
Mm-hmm. You were going to read a poem called God the Bear. God
the Bear. Yeah. I've had a little pushback a couple of times on that one. God the Bear. Our God is a great bear who leaves his paw prints on the snowy trail of the lives we are called to live, convincing us he was here. Now he's moving there. And though as the sun summits the high peaks, the graphics of his purposes begin to thaw. We've seen what we have seen. The tracks invite us to step up into the glisten of melt over rocks and rough scree. And though it is out of sight, somewhere up there, the summit raises its head with such splendor that our blisters and bruises are simply healed at the sight. And John and I live just about an hour away from Mount Baker, which is one of the highest peaks in the continent. And, it has these slopes, which are covered with snow in the winter. And you can see the paw prints of animals as they climb. You can see on the roads. I remember once driving up to Mount Baker, and in the winter, there's a lot of skiing going on up there. But we saw this mother bear and two cubs crossing the road in front of us. And I'm not sure that would happen much anymore, because there are not many bears left in our part of the world. But just that image of the power and the strength of that big animal, and how God leaves his paw prints, as it were, on the slopes of our own lives.
Why have you had pushback about that poem?
Sorry?
You said that you'd had pushback about this poem. Why was that? Yeah, I think before you read it, you said that there'd been some kind of resistance to this.
Well, it's not a conventional image of God. Put it that way. So, yeah,
it's a pretty majestic image.
Yeah, yes. But, it's not our usual understanding of who God is and his role. But that's what poetry does. I like to find an image that's a little different, that causes us to think in a little different direction.
Yeah, I was reminded through reading this poem of a great poem by Edith Sitwell, Still Falls the Rain, which she wrote during the Second World War, I think. And she's reflecting on the tragedies of the time. But she likens Christ to a bear, actually, in that. But it's a very different image to the one that you chose. It's the bear, the baited bear, the bear in the sideshow, who's kind of...
Oh, yes, almost. The bear, yeah.
And he bears in his heart, this is Christ, all wounds, those of the light that died, the last faint spark in the self-murdered heart, the wounds of the sad, uncomprehending dark, the wounds of the baited bear, the blind and weeping bear, whom the keepers beat on his helpless flesh. There's a, he sees that as a kind of, it's obviously a terrible image, and like the kind of bear that you've pictured, but both the images, yours and hers, are about the healing that comes through this bear.
Yes. And I think that's what poetry calls us to do, to enter into the emotion and the at an integral level, that our souls, our spirits can be joined with those of the poet. As we read the words, we begin to enter into the experience of another human being. And poetry is that wonderful conversation that it requires a response. We can't just let it sit there. We have to respond to it, either negatively or positively. Or perhaps, reading other poets like Mary Oliver. And there are so many wonderful poets writing today, poets of faith, but also many other wonderful poets. And I read a lot of poetry. I read magazines. One of my favorite magazines is the New Yorker, because the writing in it is so beautiful, so splendid, so skilled. And that's where my thinking is often engaged in a way that results in some new writing on my part.
Beautiful. So shall we move to the last poem, I think? Promises?
Okay, which one do you want?
Promises.
Okay, trying to remember where that is. Do you have that page number?
I don't.
I'll find it.
Well, anyway, you can read whatever you want, Lucy. You're in.
Okay, well, okay, let's see. Here we go. Okay, here's a poem called The Child. It's on page 100. He was everyone's hero, my father, the missionary doctor. In retirement, though never fully, he wore tweed and smelled manly. 60 when I was born, his first child. My mother, 47, gave difficult birth under a sheet. I was named Lucy and meant to be the light of their lives. Most of what he told me was true, at least for him. His mild mind always angled at God in an ecstatic slant that was too steep for me. So true, was Jesus coming to rapture us? And when? And would it be very loud? And would it hurt blowing through the roof? London and thick fog, out shopping at Harrods, me waiting in the car, my 5-year-old heart pounding with panic that they wouldn't come back and I'd be left. And at night, I'd beaten my way into their bedroom to listen for their breathing, and no, I was not abandoned yet. I worried that I hadn't said the words in the right order or sincerely enough about asking Jesus into my heart. Jesus seemed too big to get in anyway, and he'd know about my lies that put the blame for lying on my little brother. Growing up, I could give God only a teaspoonful of myself. They told me he wanted an overflow, a fire hose worth. It leaks more easily now, tracking its salt down the wrinkles on my cheek. So that's the story of my understanding of who God is, and how sometimes it's difficult for a child to understand.
Yeah. You obviously, throughout your life, and this is something that you kind of were encouraged by your parents, but you've believed in words and
Yes.
the power of words and the ability of words to carry not just meaning, but the life of God himself, in a way.
Yes. And God, that's so wonderful. That the Logos, the word, the original word of God is available to us and gives us that model. I love the first chapter of John. In the beginning, I used to be able to repeat the whole thing in Greek. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. That whole idea of communication, the Logos, the deity who speaks into our lives and allows us to speak back, gives us an opportunity to respond with our own words.
Well, it's a great gift that you've given to us through your poems and this collection of poetry. Thanks so much for being with us today and talking about what matters so much to you, these words and the word. So, Lucy, thank you very much indeed. Your collection of poems, The Generosity, is published by
Paraclete Press.
Yeah. And available from all good bookshops, but especially from Regent College Bookstore, which is now open again.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for those of you who've joined us to share in this conversation as well. There'll be more such book launches in the weeks and months to come. Look out for them. But for now, thank you, Lucy, and thank you for watching.
Thank you, Ewan. Thank you for this invitation. It was wonderful. It was great fun.